One of the things that I love about One Rental at a Time is we continue to attract experts across the landscape. And here we have Taylor from Life Goal Investments, a 10-year Wall Street veteran who's been in the trenches. And what he has just done on Instagram is amazing. He just did a kind of 3 economic scenarios for the horrific Israeli and Hamas war. And I think we need to talk about these, folks. You know that I am no expert on the Middle East, and I will never pretend to be. But if you want to talk economics, I think that is a conversation worth having. So, Taylor, what do you got? What are the 3 scenarios?
Yeah, and as you already alluded to, this is horrific what's playing out on all sides. So this is not a political conversation. It's not anything about that. It's all about how this impacts the economy and the markets at large. And that's kind of what I try to distill down for folks. But yeah, to your point, I think there's kind of 3 scenarios that could potentially play out here. The first one is the one that everyone's hoping for, and that is where Israel and Gaza and Hamas in Gaza, the fight is localized there, and it stays without outside impact from any other forces. And with that, that's what's playing out to this extent. And it's not to say that that's not horrific in its own right, as we've already seen thousands of deaths on both sides. But with that, I think the economic impact is relatively modest. And Bloomberg put out a really nice article that it shows a $4 a barrel pop in oil, which we've basically seen at this point, as well as a very modest tick down in global GDP of 0.1% and a tick up in global inflation of 0.1%. Right. We're talking about the hotbed of the oil markets around the globe, the Middle East. Right. So when anything plays out there, it spooks the oil markets and that drives inflation, so on and so forth. The second scenario, and the linchpin into the second and third scenario, is Iran. Iran and Israel, just for context, are sworn enemies and have been for decades. And so it's how much involvement does Iran start to have in this war? And there is already rumor that Iran backed some of the Hamas attack that took place on the initiation of this surge into Israel. But really, the next iteration of Iran's involvement would be backing and enticing Hezbollah, another militant group that sits on Israel's northern border in both Lebanon and Syria. And so Iran is saying that if Israel does not back off the offensive that they're putting together in Gaza right now, they are going to threaten via Hezbollah in the northern border. And so that would obviously cause a 2-front war to start being played for Israel, whether in the southwest portion of their country is Gaza, and then Lebanon and Syria in the north. And what comes economically with that is larger sanctions on Iran, because it will be more evident that Iran is actually backing this group and having them push down into the northern part of Israel. And so with that, you have a more material impact on the economy. You have an $8 pop in the price of oil. You have more like a 0.2 to 0.4% increase in global inflation and a 0.2 to 0.4% decrease in global GDP. So that's scenario 2. And then the catastrophic scenario 3 is where we get an all-out involvement of Iran in a war with Israel. And that has obviously a spider web of things that play out there. Obviously, the United States has stated that we are an ally of Israel and will back Israel to some extent. But the other world superpowers that are China and Russia, that are kind of becoming more and more of a foe of ours in general, are also deeply entrenched in Iranian affairs. And so what plays out from that extent, who exactly knows from the involvement of the outside players? But this is largely what caused the oil embargo in the 1970s that we experienced as a country. So the U.S. backed Israel in the Israel-Arab War. Now, it was a little bit of a broader war playing out in the Arab nations against Israel at the time, whereas this is more confined. But nonetheless, that caused a quadrupling of gas prices here in the United States. That was in 1973 and sent us into the inflationary spiral that we experienced throughout the 1970s, culminating in 1981, 1982, finally having inflation roll over. But in a 12-year span, we had 4 recessions. And so the economic impact there is absolutely catastrophic.
I'll throw out a 4th scenario just to get it out in the world. We could have peace breakout. That would be
Fair.
nice.
Very fair. Very fair. Very fair.
Yeah. I think again, when I look at this, powder keg. And again, our job is to make decisions, on ours, and in doing that in the face of horrific atrocities on both sides is just it's almost unconscionable, but it's the things that we have to do. Um, when I looked at this and I made a call, I thought there were kind of three things that the average American would see almost immediately. One is oil would pop, and it's gone up $4. And the worse this gets, the higher that goes. I think you've kind of reiterated that. But one thing that I thought was interesting was the 10-year rate would fall. And we saw some of that last week, but it's popping today. Maybe we'll talk about that in video number 2. I don't
Yeah.
know if it's popping because there's hope for peace or negotiations or what. Like this, I don't know if it's the Wall Street saying this might be over. I mean, I hope it's over, but the pop in the 10-year this morning was weird to me. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a great point. I think that normally when you get this risk off sentiment, which war causes risk off sentiment and people flight to quality, that drives the 10-year treasury yields down to your
Yeah.
very point. But I think what we've seen is the 10-year has been on a march upwards. And then we got CPI and PPI data last week that came out, inflationary data that came out hot, which would have propelled it even higher had we not had this outstanding force on the other side. So you're getting this kind of push and pull. I don't believe, in my opinion, that this is a natural thing that's playing out because of potential peace talks and things like that. I
Wishful
don't
thinking.
see.
Wishful
Yeah,
thinking.
yeah, wishful thinking. Yeah. I think that's the case, and I think that it's more of a reality of the inflationary environment that we're seeing ourselves in.
And then I guess the last thing I was thinking about is, obviously the Russia-Ukraine war has been going on for over a year now.
Right.
Is it 2 years? It's been forever.
2021. Yeah, wasn't it in 2021 in the March of 21? I think.
Yeah.
So a
So
year and a
it's
half
been a
now.
long time. And um
2 years, right?
yeah, we
Or
don't
maybe it's
yeah.
2022. I don't know. Yeah, you're right. It's hard to keep. That's pathetic, but it's hard to keep track of that stuff these days.
Yeah, it's rough. Um I just look at the global economy, and I think it was I think there were two quotes last week that got my attention. Jamie Dimon, of course, came out and said
Yeah.
this is basically the riskiest environment we've been in several decades, right, from a worldwide level. And then you got Ray Dalio. I don't know if you saw this, dude. Ray Dalio came out and said we're 50-50 from World War III. I'm like, dude, what are you
Yeah.
doing?
Yeah. Well, the one that popped to me too is Paul Tudor Jones. Paul
Oh,
Tudor
yeah.
Jones said, listen, this is geopolitical risk that just got ramped up in a massive way into an environment that was already a tricky economic backdrop for us here in the United States. I think when you look at the geopolitics of this whole thing, there's a little bit of a broader thing playing out as well, empowering both Russia and China right now. So if we have to take and, appropriate our funds differently that would have gone to Ukraine because we aren't a bottomless pit, and give some of them to Israel on the other end, that obviously emboldens that attack that Russia is able to place on the Ukraine. And then the one that I think people are kind of poo-pooing, listen, this is not my comments. I don't have any expertise in this, but Harvard professors, et cetera, are saying China is looking like there's potential they're mobilizing on Taiwan. And I know we've been speaking about this for some time now, but the reality is, again, just like Israel's going to have a tough two-front war there, us from a support standpoint saying, okay, we got Ukraine, Russia, we got Israel, Hamas, and then what would happen if China were to move in? Like, we can't stretch ourselves that thin as well. So that emboldens their ability to potentially make a move there. And again, that's a low risk scenario. That's not likely to play out, but it's one that has such meaningful impact because, again, not only, loss of lives and things like that, but it's also the chips that are produced around the world. 90% of advanced semiconductors come out of Taiwan, and they are in everything. And that is a massive inflationary pressure that would take place if it were to play out. Again, low risk, but the meaningful impact of it is huge.
Yeah. So at the end of the day, what do you think the average person should be doing with this chaos? Because again, it's been taken to another level. We're obviously also heading into the winter season. October, Black Monday, wasn't it October 16th, Black Monday, or was it the 24th?
I think it was 22nd.
22nd,
Whatever. Yeah, we're right
later
there.
this month. We're right
Yeah.
there. I mean, it's a tricky time. So I think people need to follow you on Instagram, Life Goal Investments, and all of that. Because
Solve
again,
all problems. No, I shouldn't be joking. That's not.
you at
That's not.
least you at least talk about everything. That's the key. You
Yeah,
talk
yeah, I
about it.
try to, and I try to kind of maintain that middle ground where I'm not political, I'm not any of that. I just try to give the economic impact of these things. I think the reality is, right now the market is marching higher, which is a surprise to some folks. I think there's some real tail risks out there that need to be accounted for investors out there.
There you go. Thank you, buddy.